Elijah's fingers moved with the terrifying calm of a man who had practiced secrecy until it felt like breathing. The needle slipped through torn cotton and came up again, a tiny, obedient arc. The thread tightened, pulled the frayed edge toward itself, and for a moment the world narrowed to the soft pressure between his thumb and forefinger and the small, honest sound of fabric closing. Dust motes hung in the beam of light that slanted through the storage room's narrow window and turned the air into something you could see. Little planets drifting in a battered universe. Outside, the noon bell had finished tolling, and the plantation folded itself into that brief, brittle mercy of a meal. Footsteps receded, shouts softened into a distant percussion. For 5 minutes, Elijah could pretend he was a private man polishing something that belonged only to him. A shirt, a memory, the faint hope that appearance could keep them from noticing the person beneath the cloth. His hands were raw, little calluses and open seams at the knuckles where rope and cotton and days of unremitting work had carved a map of endurance. He had a needle tucked into his shoe lining anyway. The overseer's gaze never wandered inside a shoe. He had learned to make the small containers of survival fit into the smallest places. He thought of his mother then, of her fingers faster than his, stitching life into rags and teaching him the alphabet by candlelight while the rest of the world slept. He thought of the scream when they took her from Kentucky and the way that sound lived in his chest, like a caged bird. He thought of reading, of letters that could become a ladder, and of the risk that ladder invited. A breath shifted behind him. The storage room smelled of flour and wood smoke, warm and close, and the sound of a dress moving on polished steps moved into that light like a storm cloud sliding over a summer field. He did not turn at first. He had been taught to wait, to make silence his shelter. The door eased, then closed. Then the lock clicked with the little, terrible finality of a judge's gavel. Elijah felt the room shrink around him, as if the very walls had learned to listen. Mistress Elena Thornfield stood framed in the doorway, a figure of pale silk and composure. She was 23 and wore the right kind of dress, one that made a woman into an object and a household into an explanation. Her hair was pinned, so everything about her was exact. Her perfume, jasmine over something more expensive, fell into the space between them and settled there like a witness. She closed the door behind her with the deliberate slowness of someone who knew she had stepped into a transgression and meant, at least for now, to own it. "What are you doing in here?" Her voice was quiet but sharp, as if she had wrapped a knife in velvet. Elijah lowered his eyes. To meet a white woman's gaze was to risk everything: insolence, desire, accusation. He kept his face an ordered thing, neutral, unreadable, a mask he had learned to carve in 4 years under Thornfield's rule. "Mending my shirt, mistress," he said. "Tore it in the fields." She moved across the room with that same unsettling ease, the skirt whispering against rough floorboards. She stepped closer and did what others did to things they appraised. She looked at him, at the fabric, at the stitches. Her fingers hovered over the seam he had just made, and there was no cruelty in the gesture, only a clinical, almost curious inspection. She touched the thread as one might test the grain of wood, the stitch itself, a revelation about the hand that had made it. "You sew well," she observed, as if making a note in the margins of his life. "Who taught you?" "My mother, mistress," he said, and the name unspooled a ribbon of memory. His mother's tired hands, the cramped house in Kentucky, the promise that reading was a way out that had been taken from him. He kept the rest folded away. Elena watched him, and something in the tilt of her lips became both dangerous and unexpected. "You can read too, can't you?" she asked. That question hit him harder than any lash. It sounded like the crack of a whip in that small, musty room. Reading was a treason of the smallest kind here. Letters could teach a man to think, and thinking could become a weapon. He had kept his books in the hollow of a fence post, in the bottom of an old shoe, learning to string sentences together by stolen candlelight. Denial would be a thin defense and a dangerous lie. "Yes, mistress," he said, voice a careful thing. "I can read some." Her smile was not the smile of the house when it watched men bent under punishment. It was thin, private, and it made his skin prickle. "Good. That makes things much simpler." She perched on a barrel like someone who wanted the ordinary rules to mean nothing in that moment, a breach of proper conduct that made Elijah feel off-kilter. "My husband is planning to sell you." Elijah's breath left him in a soundless scrape. The name she gave, Erasmus Wilkes, was a bell tolled for a particular kind of doom. Wilkes was the owner of the plantation men spoke about in low voices. The place whispered as if it were a mouth that could bite a life in half. Mississippi, he knew, was a place where men were broken on purpose and left to learn obedience as one learns to carry a load until the body forgets resistance. "How do you know?" he asked, and the question came out small. Elena's fingers tightened around the scrap of paper she had produced without breaking her composure. "My husband speaks as if I were a mirror that does not reflect. He speaks of shipments and prices like he counts livestock. I heard him mention names, Wilkes among them. I know what he does." Her voice had hardened like something sharpened for use. "The buyer comes next week." The world narrowed into the center of the room, and Elijah felt the edge of his life, once secure in the rhythm of work and endurance, suddenly jagged. Sold meant leaving the thin, hard comforts of the borderlands for a planter's country that kept no mercy for mouths that asked questions. It meant being turned into an object that could be flayed of whatever intelligence they'd found. It meant his name, his memory, perhaps even the last images of his mother, blotted out by some new master's ledger. "She can help you," Elena said, and the way she said help made a sound like both offer and bargain. She reached into her pocket and unfolded a careful sheet of paper as if producing a map to a cave of unknown treasures. "But you'll have to help me first." Elijah stared at the paper as if it itself might be a trick. He had spent 4 years learning that kindness wore a different face in the house, costly, conditional, and usually with a price that the poor paid for a rich woman's convenience. "What do you want?" he asked. Her eyes held his, then in a way that was almost, he had never seen this between mistress and servants, confessional. "I need someone who can read, who can carry messages without suspicion. My husband has enemies. I need to know what they plan." She tilted the page toward him, but did not offer it. "Listen to his conversations. Memorize details. Be in places where he won't notice you as anything other than a servant." She spoke plainly, each instruction another weight set on his chest. "If you do this, and do it well, I can keep you from being sold. I can arrange for you to be moved into the house. Your work would be different, less brutal." The offer was a kind of knife, sheathed in silk. The thought of housework sang like a hallelujah inside his chest. Less sunburn, fewer lashes, the possibility of a day that did not end in the ache of his back. But every bargain with a Thornfield had a seam strained tight. He knew the mistress could protect nothing if Thornfield chose profit over favor. More than that, he knew Tucker's warnings, Jonah's stories, the ways the best-laid plans untied like thread on a chair. "You want me to spy for you?" he said, and his voice was steadier than he felt. Spying could be treason. Treason could be death. But so could Wilkes, and the thought of Mississippi made his stomach drop with a kind of vertigo that had nothing to do with altitude. "If I agree, how can I trust you?" She smiled then, without softness, but with a truth that seemed to sit just under her skin. "If I were working for Harrison, you'd already be hanging from the oak for daring to eavesdrop in the first place. We are having this conversation." Her answer slid into the room and filled it with a kind of iron certainty. "Tonight, be near my husband's study. Bring wood, make yourself useful. Listen. Remember." She stepped forward and laid one small, folded parcel into his hands. A needle, new, unused, and a scrap of parchment with a practice sentence written neatly across it. "Keep this. It is for my use, and now for yours. If you betray me," she added, without the slightest change in tone, "I will say you assaulted me. You know what happens to men accused of that." He nodded. He did. The image that flashed, a tree at the edge of the quarters, a man's body leaving the morning like a story finished too early, was a warning burned on his mind. He folded himself around the choice like a shell around a pearl. One path led to a life bought by cruelty in another state. The other to a life scrubbed thin by secret work in the house, or to death if she lied. He thought of his mother's hands, and of the letters he had learned to love and understand in the thin light of stolen evenings. He thought of how knowledge had made him more dangerous, and how danger was sometimes the only way a man could become seen. The needle in his palm felt suddenly like an instrument of fate. "All right," he said. The word felt small in his mouth, but it was a bridge. "I'll be there tonight." Ellena's face did not unbend into relief so much as shift into a plan. "Good. Bring wood for the fire. Make it look like any ordinary task. Do not be seen lingering. Do not speak unless spoken to. Memorize the names, the numbers, the shipments. If you can, write nothing here. Hide whatever you learn on your person. Come to the greenhouse afterward. I will be there." He wrapped the needle in a scrap of cloth and set it back into his shoe the way he always did. And for a moment, as he straightened, the storage room seemed both smaller and more dangerous than before. The midday light slanted as if to underline the warning. The lock's click still hummed in his ears. He smoothed the sleeve he had mended with a thumb that trembled only a little, and with steps practiced to seem ordinary, slipped from the storage room and back into the rhythm of the plantation's noon. The clatter of plates, the distant barking of the dogs, the whistle of an overseer resuming his march. But beneath the surface of his movements, there was now a current, an errand that would force him into the places his life had been denied, and into the speech of men who counted human beings like grain. He told himself the risk could be measured like a stitch, tightened to hold. He told himself nothing at all about how long stitches could last when tugged by hands with a mind for profit. That evening, when the sun had forgotten the heat of the day and lamps began their slow, golden work inside the house, Elijah would find himself at the hearth's edge, arranging wood as if it were wood and not time, listening with the kind of attention that had once been used only to learn letters. He walked away from the storage room with the weight of a choice on his shoulders, and the whisper of jasmine still clinging to his skin, a scent that would come back to him in darker hours and remind him at once of the bargain and of the strange, dangerous hope that had been offered in that small, locked room. The sun had slipped into that copper-colored hour where the world Looks like it's been dipped in warm metal, and the Thornfield plantation carried its usual evening choreography. The clank of kitchen pots, the shuffle of house servants resetting the dining room, the slow stretch of shadows across the front porch. Elijah moved through it all as if he were another length of lumber being carried from one shed to another, present but invisible. A useful object with hands and legs and no interior life worth naming. A bundle of split oak rested in his arms. He'd volunteered to bring wood for the study fireplace, because volunteered meant the overseer didn't look too closely at his path. The hallway leading to Master Thornfield's study smelled of pipe smoke and lemon oil, and the voices drifting through the slightly ajar door slowed his steps like a hand pressing against his chest. He knelt, arranging the wood in the corridor, his back a deliberate arc, his fingers steady, though every part of him was a tremor. It wasn't the first time he'd hidden his fear in the simple, honest motions of work. The needle had taught him that. Small motions, steady hands, survival disguised as craft. Inside the study, Thornfield's voice rose and fell, with the smug certainty of a man who believed the world existed to kneel for him. "The shipment arrives Tuesday," he said, and the clink of glass punctuated the statement like a gavel. Elijah's pulse ticked faster. Shipment. He repeated the word silently, capturing its weight, its breath, its meaning. He kept stacking the wood, each piece quietly placed on the floor so the faint rattle of logs masked the sound of his breath. "Hargrave assures me the cargo is exceptional this time," Thornfield continued. Another voice replied, smooth, with a southern undertone. Elijah recognized it almost immediately. Mr. Calloway, a man who smiled at slaves the way one might smile at a dog that would never be allowed inside the house. "Risky business these days," Calloway said. "Federal marshals are getting bold, even this far into Ohio." Elijah's hands went still. Federal marshals, Ohio. Free soil by law, but not here, not in Thornfield's private kingdom carved from land and cruelty. After a moment, he resumed arranging the wood, pretending to be caught in the simplicity of his task. "That's why we're moving the operation," Thornfield replied casually. "The Kentucky side gives us more discretion." "The Kentucky side." Elijah filed the detail away. "And the merchandise?" asked a third man, nasal, impatient. Elijah had heard the voice before, though he didn't yet put a name to it. 12, Thornfield said. 8 men, 3 women, 1 child. Healthy. Papers showing legal bondage to plantations in Tennessee. The documents won't withstand serious scrutiny, but they'll pass in transit. The floor seemed to tilt under Elijah's knees. 12 people, 12 human beings, taken and folded into the ledger as if they were crates or barrels of sugar. He kept his movements slow, gentle, focused, but inside him, something curled inward, a tight knot of knowing. They weren't talking about legitimate trade. They were talking about stolen human lives. "The profit margin is excellent," Thornfield added. 400%. "We acquire them for around $100 and sell for $5. A low whistle from Calloway. The men laughed softly, 3 predators amused by the ease of their hunt. A scraped chair, the soft drag of a boot across the carpet. Elijah leaned forward slightly, another piece of wood placed. He forced his spine to remain neutral. "And your buyers don't ask questions?" the nasal man asked. "My buyers care about strong backs," Thornfield replied. "Not paperwork." A beat of silence. Then Calloway again. "And that preacher causing trouble, the one asking questions?" Thornfield's tone changed, shedding its amusement like a snake's old skin. "Reverend Caldwell has been handled. Tragic accident at Miller's Creek Bridge last week." Elijah's stomach lurched. Caldwell, the only white man who had ever looked at him with something like basic human regard, had not simply died. He had been made dead, a warning disguised as misfortune. Then Thornfield said the words that nearly made Elijah drop the wood entirely. "I've decided to include one of my own slaves this time. A young man, Elijah." It was a mercy that he was kneeling, because everything inside him dropped like a stone through a lake. The hallway blurred. His breath was a thin whistle in his nose. He felt his own name as if someone had touched a hot coal to his spine. "Any particular reason?" Calloway asked. "He reads," Thornfield said simply. "Thinks too much. I caught him with a book in the stables last week. A slave with ideas is a dangerous commodity." The nasal man chuckled darkly. "Wilkes will break him. He's good at that." Wilkes. The name drifted like smoke into Elijah's lungs and stayed there. He forced his fingers to lift another piece of wood. Place it. Align it. Make it look like work. The conversation wandered then, drifting to crop yields and political scandals, things that would never matter to him except as background noise in a life someone else owned. Elijah finished arranging the wood and slowly stood, bracing himself against the wall. The study door swung open abruptly. Thornfield stood there in a wash of lamplight, his pale eyes narrowing. "What are you doing here, boy?" Elijah bowed his head, lowering his gaze to the carpet. "Bringing wood for the fire, master. Cook said you needed it." Thornfield stepped closer, breathing whiskey and suspicion. "How long have you been outside this door?" "Just arrived, master." He kept his voice dull, unremarkable, nothing like the storm inside him. Thornfield stared long enough that Elijah felt each second scrape across his nerves. Then the man gestured. "Bring it inside." Elijah carried the wood into the study. 3 men watched him with lazy disinterest, the way they'd watch a dog carrying a newspaper. He arranged the logs carefully, head down. But he felt Thornfield's gaze cutting through him the entire time. When he straightened, the master lifted his glass. "Get out," he said. Elijah obeyed, stepping backward until the door clicked shut behind him. Only when he reached the corridor's end did he let out a thin, unsteady breath. The night air outside was cold and honest, and Elijah let it fill his lungs like a drowning man sucking air after breaking the water's surface. He needed to find Eleanor. He needed to bring her the news. He needed Elijah. He spun at the whisper. Martha stood by the kitchen garden, half shadow and half moonlight. "Mistress wants you," she murmured. "In the greenhouse. Go. Now." Her face was unreadable. Was she helping or delivering him to something worse? Elijah nodded once and moved toward the greenhouse. The glass building glowed faintly in the dark, lamplight turning its panes into fractured amber. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of earth and orchids, flowers brought from faraway places on ships he could never ride. Eleanor stood in the center, pale and still, her expression carved from something colder than fear. "Well," she asked, "what did you hear?" He took a breath that felt jagged in his throat. "Your husband is doing more than you thought. He's shipping people, 12 of them. Tuesday night, he told her everything. The shipment, the forged papers, the move to Kentucky, the murder of Reverend Caldwell, and what he struggled to say, he saw land in her expression anyway. He's adding me to the shipment," Elijah finished. Her knuckles whitened around the pruning shears in her hand. She sat heavily on a wooden bench, as if the news had weight. 12 people, she repeated, one a child. "And Harrison will sell you to Wilkes." "Yes." She stood then, all sharp lines and decision. "Then we must move faster." Elijah stared. "Mistress, what do you mean?" She crossed the room to a locked cabinet, opened it with a small key she wore beneath her dress, and brought out a leather-bound journal. "I haven't been idle," she said. "For months, I've been gathering evidence." Evidence. The word felt impossible in a greenhouse full of flowers. "My uncle is Judge William Ellsworth," she continued, flipping pages filled with her careful handwriting. "He's investigating a trafficking network that steals free blacks from northern states. Harrison is part of it. I intend to bring him down." Elijah's pulse stumbled in confusion. "You're helping the authorities?" "I am helping justice," she said simply. She handed him a folded document. "Read this." He unfolded it. Manumission papers, his name, blank signature lines. "When we have enough evidence," she said quietly, "these will be filed, not only for you, for every enslaved person on this plantation." Elijah's throat closed. Freedom. Written, promised, possible. "Why?" he whispered. Her expression softened for the first time since he'd met her. "Because my mother made me swear I would never look away from human suffering. I broke that promise. I intend to repair it." The words swirled with equal parts sincerity and danger. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, because survival had already chosen for him. Elena leaned closer. "Warn the 12 being brought to the warehouse." He blinked. "Warn them? How?" "There's a network, an organization helping people reach Canada. My mother's family had ties to it. Here, a man named Solomon works near the river. We must get word to him." Elijah's heart thudded like a drum. Helping fugitives was a death sentence. "Mistress, how—" "Tomorrow," she cut in. "I will take you to town. You will bring a message to Jenkins, the barber. He can reach Solomon." Elijah felt the danger rise around him like steam. "But slaves aren't allowed in town." "I'll request you specifically," she said. "No one will question me." He nodded slowly. "Tell him this," Elena continued. 12 people arrived Tuesday at midnight at Hargrave's Riverside warehouse. He will know what to do. The plan was thin, fragile, but real. Elijah looked toward the glass walls of the greenhouse, stars glittering above like cold needles. "I'll do it," he said. Elena's shoulders loosened a fraction. "Good. And Elijah, if anything feels wrong, you abandon the plan. Your life matters." He didn't answer. He doubted she wanted the truth, that he would die before letting 12 strangers be devoured by the same machine that threatened him. The next morning, Thornfield's household buzzed with its usual vanity and viciousness. Elijah was summoned early, and Elena insisted he wear better clothes, passing it off as appropriate presentation for town. The fabric felt strange, softer than the field rags he was used to. Samuel, one of the older slaves, shot him a warning look. "Careful," Samuel murmured. "Mistress's interest isn't always a blessing." Elijah kept silent. In town, the streets bustled with wagons and market stalls. The world beyond Thornfield's boundaries felt too large and too bright. Elena instructed him to deliver a note to the mercantile while she visited the millinery shop. The moment he saw the clerk turn to fetch items, Elijah slipped out the door and crossed the street. The bell on Jenkins's barber shop jingled as he entered. Jenkins looked up, froze, then flicked his eyes toward a man waiting in the corner. Elijah's stomach flipped. Walter Hargrave. Hargrave looked at him, a long, slow look, then returned to his newspaper. When the customer left and Hargrave followed, Jenkins closed the door, flipped the sign, and lowered his voice. "Boy, what message you carrying that has Hargrave asking questions?" Elijah gave him the details, quick and sharp. Jenkins's jaw tightened. "I'll get word to Solomon. But this is a big ask with little time." Elijah nodded, slipped back across the street, and rejoined the mercantile just as the clerk emerged. The trip back to the plantation was taut, silent, but Elijah's dread solidified the moment they reached the house. Hargrave's horse was tied at the hitching post. Eleanor felt Elijah's tension and whispered, "Say nothing." Inside, Simmons appeared like a vulture catching scent of blood. "Master wants to see you," he said, voice too pleased. Elijah followed, heartbeat pounding. Inside the study stood Thornfield and Hargrave. Thornfield's voice was ice. "Explain why you went into Jenkins's barber shop." Elijah lied with a calm he did not feel. "I thought I saw someone I recognized." Hargrave stepped closer. "You delivered a message." "I asked about pomade for Master Thornfield," Elijah corrected. "Thought it might please him." The lie hung there, trembling. Thornfield studied him with a long, cold stare. "You will remain confined to the quarters when not working. Simmons will watch you." "Yes, master." As Simmons dragged him out, Hargrave's voice drifted behind him. "He knows something." Thornfield replied, "He'll be shipped Tuesday." The door shut. Simmons shoved Elijah hard toward the path. "I'll watch you every minute," he said, with a grin. "Every minute. 48 hours until the shipment." And no way to warn Eleanor, no way to know if Solomon had received the message, no way to know if freedom or death was racing toward him faster. The North Field stretched wide and sunburned under the weight of late afternoon, rows of cotton shimmering like an endless pale sea. Elijah worked under Simmons's eye, a presence so constant it felt like a shadow stitched to his skin. Every time Elijah shifted, Simmons's voice followed, a threat shaped like a name, a warning disguised as a drawled command. Other hands bent over the plants with their usual rhythm, but Elijah's movements were mechanical, careful, shaped by the knowledge that every gesture might be the wrong one. The sun sank lower, turning the field into a bruise of gold and red. Sweat clung to Elijah's back, dampening the good clothes he had changed out of only hours before. Every swing of his arm reminded him of the conversation in the study, of Hargrave's pale eyes flicking over him like he was already a corpse, measured for its coffin. He could still hear Thornfield's voice, flat, confident. "He'll be shipped Tuesday." Shipped. The word felt like a stone lodged in his throat. Simmons paced the row like a man waiting for a chance to deliver punishment. "Pick faster," he snapped whenever Elijah paused to think, even for a breath. "You ain't special." Elijah didn't answer. He couldn't afford to. His mind was already a hive of impossible calculations. He didn't know whether Eleanor had been summoned, whether she knew Hargrave had been to the house, whether she grasped how close Thornfield was to suspicion. He needed to warn her, but Simmons' surveillance was total. The greenhouse felt like a place in another world, unreachable now. The hours crawled, then bled into evening. Only when the sky dimmed fully and the overseer finally gave the order for the hands to return to the quarters did Elijah feel his chest unlock enough to draw a deeper breath. But Simmons stayed close as the men trudged toward the long, low building. "I sleep light," Simmons muttered near his ear. "Try anything stupid, and I'll know." Elijah kept his eyes on the ground. "Yes, sir," he said softly. The quarters swallowed him in dim light and human heat, the sighs of exhausted men, the rustling of straw bedding, the muttered prayers. It was a familiar kind of darkness. Samuel caught Elijah's arm as he passed. "You walked into something today," Samuel murmured. "I can see it on you." Elijah forced a neutral expression. "Just trouble with the master." "That's never just," Samuel replied. His dark eyes held a warning, but also something like concern. Dangerous, generous, human concern. Stay alive, son. That's the job. Elijah nodded and moved to his pallet. He lay on his back, staring at the beams overhead. The moonlight slipping through the cracks made shifting lines on the wood that looked almost like handwriting. He thought of Elena's journal, her neat rows of letters, the manumission papers folded cleanly like a promise. He thought of the greenhouse, the humid air, the scent of earth, the way her voice had softened when she spoke of justice. He thought of the 12 people waiting to be shipped. He thought of Solomon, Jenkins, the network he could only imagine. Was the message moving? Or had Hargrave's eyes cut the thread? He fell asleep with these questions circling him like wolves. Morning broke with a clatter, Simmons banging on the quarters door with the flat of his hand. Elijah rose with the others, his muscles throbbing from yesterday's work, and stepped back into the world that owned him. The day unfolded with a strange tightness. Simmons watched every motion, every word exchanged, every moment Elijah's gaze lingered anywhere too long. Elijah kept his head down, picking, pulling, depositing, moving like a cog. The field around him blurred into monotony. But under it all, the hours ticked closer to Tuesday. At midday meal, as the others hunched over their tin bowls, Elijah sat in the grass, head bent. Martha approached, carrying a tray she was taking back to the kitchen. She paused near him, eyes flicking to Simmons across the yard, then whispered in a voice thin as a reed, "Greenhouse, after dark." Elijah swallowed the shock like a gulp of cold water. "You sure?" he murmured. She nodded. "Mistress said to find you, said you'd know why." Elijah didn't dare let relief wash over him. Relief could make a man careless. He just nodded, keeping his hands steady. The hours dragged, long and suffocating. When dusk finally wrapped itself around the plantation, Simmons marched the hands back to the quarters, then lingered outside the door. Elijah lay down with the others, listening to Simmons's boots pacing, pacing, pacing. 2 hours passed. 3. The pacing slowed, then stopped. A soft snore broke the quiet. Elijah waited another 10 minutes. Then he rose silently, slipped through the doorway, and moved into the night like a shadow learning to walk. The greenhouse gleamed faintly at the garden's edge, its panes catching moonlight like shards of a broken mirror. Elijah crossed the grass quickly, heart banging in his chest like a loose door in a storm. He reached the greenhouse door and slipped inside. Eleanor stood in the center, lamplight haloing her pale hair. She had not changed from the afternoon's dress. Her posture was rigid, her expression strained in a way he had never seen. "Elijah," she breathed, relief flickering across her face. "Thank God." He closed the door gently. "Mistress, it's dangerous to—" "I know," she said sharply, "but we have no choice." She moved toward him, hands clasped, fingers white. "Jenkins sent word. Solomon received your message." Elijah's breath caught. "He did?" "Yes. He's organizing help for Tuesday night." Something inside Elijah lifted, then fell again when Elena continued. "But Hargrave visited my husband again tonight." Elijah's stomach twisted. Elena paced between the potted palms, anxiety vibrating in her steps. "He told Harrison you entered the barber shop. He claims Jenkins was evasive. He believes correctly that you spoke with him." Elijah felt the world tilt. "Does he know what I said?" "No," she said quickly. "Jenkins denied it. But suspicion is enough." She stopped before Elijah, eyes burning with an urgency that made the air hum. "Harrison has moved up the timetable. He told Hargrave he wants to send the shipment early, possibly by tomorrow night." Tomorrow. Tomorrow. The word was a hammer hitting something fragile. Elijah breathed carefully. Then Solomon needs to know, now. I've already sent a message with one of my maids, Elelena replied. It should reach town by dawn. He let out a slow breath. And the marshals? Your uncle? He rides tomorrow, she said. If we deliver him what he needs, he will act. But something in her voice carried a crack. Elijah, she whispered. If Harrison suspects you've been listening, he won't wait for the sale. He'll make an example of you. Tonight, tomorrow, it doesn't matter. Elijah stood very still. What do you want me to do, mistress? Her next words came like a blade. You must get off this plantation. He stared. What? She stepped closer. I can create a distraction. A fire in the outer barn. The household will rush to put it out. You've been watched, but even Simmons will be pulled into helping. You slip out through the south fence. Go to the river. Solomon will meet you there. Elijah's thoughts crashed into one another. Mistress, if I run, if I'm caught, you'll be killed if you stay, she said fiercely. At least, if you reach Solomon, you have a chance. Elijah shook his head slowly. But the 12, if I flee, who helps them? Elena's voice trembled, for the first time cracking through her porcelain calm. Solomon will still go. The marshals will still come. Elijah, her voice softened, broke. I don't want your blood on my conscience. Silence tucked itself between them. Elijah looked at the greenhouse plants, tender leaves, delicate petals, nurtured in glass though they did not belong here. They had lived because someone tended them, because someone believed they deserved a chance to survive in unfamiliar soil. He thought of his mother, her hands guiding his over letters, her voice telling him stories of places where chains could not reach. He thought of the 12 waiting to be stolen, of Solomon risking everything to intercept them, of Elena risking her marriage, her safety, her life. He thought of Mississippi. He shook his head. I can't run. Elena's breath caught. Elijah, I stay, he said gently but firmly. If I leave, they'll say I fled. Harrison will tighten security. Solomon might walk into a trap. If I stay, everything stays the way he expects. She stared at him, eyes shining with fear and something else. Respect, maybe, or a kind of sorrow. You are braver than anyone I have ever known. I'm just trying to stay alive, he said softly. No, her voice steadied. You are doing more. A distant shout snapped both their heads toward the door. Simmons' voice. Mistress, you in there? Elena's eyes widened. She blew out the lamp, plunging the greenhouse into darkness. Elijah, hide, she whispered urgently. He ducked behind the large palm fronds, heart pounding like a drum. The door creaked open. Simmons stepped inside, lantern in hand. The light swung across Elena's face, calm, composed. Mistress, Simmons said, suspiciously, did you call for the boy? I saw him out the quarters earlier. Elena's voice sharpened instantly into that cold, privileged blade. Are you implying I cannot walk my own gardens without your supervision? Simmons stiffened. No, ma'am. Just, Master said to keep an eye on that one. I am well aware of what my husband said, she snapped, and I am also aware that his orders do not supersede my authority when I am outside the house. Simmons swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Good, she said icily. Return to your post. Simmons hesitated, eyes sweeping the greenhouse. Elena moved between him and Elijah's hiding place, posture rigid with command. Now. Simmons finally backed out, closing the door behind him. Elijah waited until the footsteps faded. Then he emerged slowly, breath shaking. Elena exhaled. He suspects more than he should. Elijah looked at her. It won't be long. No, she whispered. It won't. She touched his hand, not a gesture of ownership, but a fierce, desperate plea. Elijah, if anything happens, he shook his head. We move forward. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, then released him. Go. Before Simmons circles back, Elijah slipped out into the night. By the time he reached the quarters again, dawn was already a rumor at the edge of the sky. Tomorrow, or tonight, the shipment would come. And somewhere in the darkness, Solomon was moving. The marshals were riding. And the plantation, every secret, every whispered name, every ledger entry, was about to fracture. Whatever came next, Elijah would be in its center, not as a pawn, but as a witness. And perhaps, if fate allowed it, as a man about to step into a world he had only ever read about in stolen light.